it goes. Hey folks, how you doing? Oh, where's the off button? Where is the off button? Where is the off button? I just realised that I don't know if there's any backing track coming through there. I've just had a lovely play along, and I have no idea if any backing track comes through. I think it has, but I'm just trying to search for the off button, and I couldn't find it. Hey folks, welcome on board. It's the Monday Guitar Show. My name's Nick Jennison. We're doing the thing that we do on Mondays, which is hang out and talk about the guitar. Apologies for the state of my hair. I've literally just come from the gym, as I often do on Mondays, but gotta tell you, it was a bit more just come from the gym than usual. So I'm a little bit disheveled today, but that's okay. I'm sure you guys can let me off because Silver Sky's out. Now this seems like the appropriate guitar for today's conversations because today we are discussing chords, and specifically we're going to discuss the fundamentals of chord construction, how chords go together, what goes into making some of your favorite chord progressions, although that's more of a discussion for next week. We're going to be continuing this throughout the month of October. This is all informed by I'm going to say member feedback from our friends at Lick Library. So I'm sure you guys know these streams are brought to you by licklibrary.com and brought to you by Guitar Interactive as well. We get a lot of folks asking over at Lick Library, hey, what's the deal with chords? How can I tell what notes are supposed to be in a chord? How can I tell when I'm supposed to play over them? So this is really something of a member request, let's say, and that's kind of where we're going with this. So let's begin by saying some quick hellos, but before we go into that too sturdily, let's say, I want to know from you guys, as usual, let me know what guitar you're playing. Vil S has coined the term Chordtober, and that's what we're going to be calling it, Chordtober. I like that an awful lot. Now, yeah, we're going to get a chord playing up for October, because let's be honest, as guitar players, we spend it's an interesting one. We probably spend about 90% of our practice time working on lead guitar playing and about 10% of our practice time, if that, working on our rhythm playing or our chord playing. But then when we get to the gig and we actually play with other musicians, that ratio flips and we spend about 90% of the time playing chords and playing rhythm, and we spend about 10% of the time, if we're lucky, playing solos. But anyway, I want to know what guitar you're playing. I thought we'd bust out the Silver Sky for a few reasons. First of all, it's an S-type guitar. We all know what I mean by that. It's a Strat, in essence. Strats, chords, beautiful thing. We've got the wiggly stick, so we can give it just a little bit of that shimmery vibrato. Also, as I'm sure you guys will see, I don't know if you can really make it out, but the Super Kraken, oh, there's my stomach. Super Kraken is still poorly. So yeah, no Super Kraken tonight, which is fine by me because we're using the Super Sheriff. Super Sheriff sounds beautiful. Anyway, we're going to say some hellos. Let's quickly get into the comments, see how everyone's getting on, and then we'll get into the core of the subject. Marcin is our first through the door, followed by Sacred Godslayer. PJ is here. Cracker Tom's tuning in from Lisbon, always on vacation. I'm envious of you, my man. I wish I could travel as much as you do. Maybe one day. Who knows, right? Maybe that's in the future. Who can tell? Helmet Strap is here. Great to see you. Larry Warren's tuning in. Happy Thanksgiving from Canada. I didn't know it was Canadian Thanksgiving, but fantastic. Hey, thanks for coming on board, Larry. Happy Thanksgiving to you too. Response Audio is here. Kate Strange is tuning in. Tom Ace is in the house. Mike Seedorf says happy Monday and fellow shredders. He's playing his 91 Charvel Fusion Deluxe. That is a cool guitar, right? Certified cool guitar. I'm sure if Nick Harrison is here, he'll have something to say about that because that is a very cool guitar. It is a, oh, let's get this right. Sorry. Yeah, it's a Gibson style scale length. 16-inch neck radius. Now that is something of a unique instrument, let's just say, because you don't get many shredder type guitars with that Gibson scale length. It's a really interesting instrument, super cool. So that is a cool guitar, Mike. You get the cool guitar seal of approval. Ergo Hog is here, great to see you. Franz is tuning in, as is Block 18, Citizen 741. Our friend Bill with Chordtober says hello everyone, great to see you. Deadman Doogie Van Dugerson, there's a name I haven't said for a while, lovely to see you. Says hey all. Sacred Godslayer's tuning in. Mark McNish is in the house, and he says it's a timely subject because he's been learning triads and we'll hopefully jump into more chord knowledge. Love a bit of that. Nice. Bernard Newton's here. Let music be love. Yes, indeed. Dylan Jessup's in the house. Catmandu 1962 is tuning in with his 2019 Gibson LP Standard. Very cool. Very cool indeed. Love a bit of that. Who else do we have? Oh, we've got a pre-order for an Ibanez 540 540. Very nice, very nice. With 30 years for a reissue. One of these days, I promise, I'll get my old 550 on the go. By the way, in case anybody's wondering about the Ibanez naming convention, that is not me trying to one-up by saying, you've got a 540, I've got a 550. It's not how it works. 540s, super cool guitar. Mike Seed up with a bit of love for the Silver Sky. Love a bit of that. Nick Harrison's here. Our friend James is in the house. We've not crossed paths at the gym this evening, but we will soon. James, great to see you. Westmore Barbell Social soon, hopefully. Gerald Carson is in the house. He's asking if I've tried the new PRS SE Clio. I have not. I haven't tried any of the Clios, and I'd be really interested to, because for all, it's not really my thing with the dragons and the really thin body and all that stuff. It is two things that I love, which is PRS and Fishman Fluence, or clagged together. Now, Fishman Fluence is a very broad set of pickups, in a very broad range of pickups, and the pickups I tend to gravitate towards are more derived from the classic line rather than from the modern line. But, you know, hey, I wouldn't say no. That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say. James Ford is in the house. Great to see you. Block 18 with a lovely compliment. Thank you very much. Great topic. Yes, indeed. My friend Rob's tuning in. Rob, I hope you're doing well. If you guys haven't done so already, go check out Rob's band, Mad Morning. Fantastic stuff, right? Love it. It's to be heard, to be believed. But me and Rob were in a band for a good length of time. It was a lot of fun. And we used to play in bands on the scene in Newcastle a lot as well. Rob's a great guy. Top musician as well. Rob, thanks for joining us. Mal Riley's here. PJ's playing his PRS. We've got some RG770, super cool, and a JS1000. Love a bit of that. A Universe guitar from our friend James Ford. I used to lust after Universe guitars. I used to want the black one with the little Illuminati guy down here. That was the one for me. Our friend Domenico Nitti is tuning in. This is not clicking for some reason. Mouse, behave yourself. It says Gibson Les Paul Studio, Fender Telecaster 50 series, and a Fender Stratocaster American Standard. Very cool. Very cool guitars. Who else have we got? Oh, we got Marcin's playing his PRS. We've got a Blade RH4. Very nice. We've got a red Peavey Wolfgang. Love a bit of that. Very nice. I'm hoping I don't miss anybody. I'm going to try and get through as many of these as we possibly can. 1984 Strat, my birth year. Good year. Love a bit of that. Hoping for some sus chords today. You know it. And that is sus not in the sense that Gen Z mean it. So it's not that kind of sus. But sus chords. I had to communicate this with a few students who were in their late teens, early 20s. And you describe them, you tell them a sus chord and they go, what? Like, it's the same generation that when presented with the sharp symbol will respond with, is that a hashtag? Frightening. But yeah, what can you say, right? What can you say? Nick's playing this Hey My Diablo, super cool, very, very cool. Paul Bradshaw's tuning in, Tall Paul, lovely to see you. Steve Louth is here. Four Cornish is here. Who else have we got? Let's make sure we've got everyone. We've got a 335. Steve Ford's tuning in, and finally Joe Staup is tuning in with his very cool selection of guitars. Let us know which one you're playing, Joe, because there's some really cool guitars. I want to know which one you're playing this evening. And finally, we've got a JP15 from our friend Steve. You guys have got some nice guitars, let me tell you. Anyway, let's get into the core of the lesson, which is chords, how they work and what you are to do with them. So this session will begin quite basic. I'm going to show this to you. I'll tell you right now, it's going to be quite basic, but stick with us because we have some stuff that is hopefully going to be of interest, I think, to more advanced players. We're going to try and get as many folks on board with this as we can. But let's begin by discussing what chords are and what chords are not. So this is quite a simple definition. If we play a single note, that is not a chord. It is a note. I'm sure we can all agree on that. Note, chord. We all understand the distinction between the two. Now the question is, how many notes do we need to have a chord? We can have this chord, which contains a sum total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 notes, or 3 notes, depending upon how you measure it. We'll answer that question in a second. Is this a chord? 2 notes. Depends. You could call that a chord. Is that a chord? 2 notes? Maybe less so. Who knows? We're going to figure this out. We've got lots of votes for 2+. I would probably argue that you could maybe say 2, but as soon as you get to 3, it is a chord. Now, realistically, what a chord is it is a combination of notes that conveys some kind of harmonic information. And harmonic information refers to the overall harmony of whatever piece of music we're playing. Now, when I say harmony, what I don't mean is harmony like the bit in the solo from More Than a Feeling, which goes... That would be a guitar harmony. Harmony in this sense is what do the chords do. Now, if you have enough notes to convey the harmony of a piece of music, I would probably argue it's the chord. But most of the time that requires 3. And we're going to begin with 3-note chords, which are the simplest, but also for many guitar players, the most confusing stage of learning chords. Now, we might hear these referred to as triads. And triad is something of a unique definition, really. It's a 3-note chord, and it is a fully fledged chord. There is no argument over the fact that it's a chord, but in many jazz circles, a triad is not considered a full chord. In many jazz circles, you require 4 notes for it to be a chord. We require the 7th for it to be a chord, and a triad is partial, as chords go, in the same way that many folks who say triad 3 notes minimum would consider a power chord, just 2 notes, partial. So there's some wiggle in this definition, and we're not really here to argue over definitions, but the triad is a 3-note chord. Now let's talk about what the 3-note chord is constructed of. There are several of them, and for this we need to discuss intervals very quickly. So for this, we're going to play a series of notes up our low E string. And this is going to spell out the E major scale. This will give us some frame of reference for the intervals that we are about to play. So here they are. We play E, we play fret 2, fret 4, fret 5, fret 7, fret 9, fret 11, and fret 12. I'll say that again. 0, 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, 11, 12. You might be familiar with this sound as do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Or in many cases, C is substituted for T. I've always learned it as T, but then I had to teach some solfege to a bunch of singers, which is what that language is, solfege. I had to teach it to a bunch of singers, and there was one line that was so, mi, ti, fa, ti. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to use C, because so, mi, ti, fa, ti, it was interesting. There have been worse things that have come across my path when teaching singers, let me tell you, but that's one of them. Anyway, so this outlines our major scale, E major you might know as this. You might know it as this. You might know it as this. Depending upon where you are in your stage of learning, there's all sorts of ways we can play the major scale, but it all contains the same notes. If we change any of the notes, it ceases to be a major scale. Now, our chords are expressed in reference to the major scale, i.e., we begin by taking a look at the intervals in the major scale and we construct chords from that. Let's take a look at an E major chord, which we all know, hopefully, as this. Now that is going to be E, B, E, G, B, and E. E major. That is our chord. We all know what it means. We all know what it does. Let's take a look at the individual constituent notes of that chord and map them out on our major scale. So we have an E, that's 1. We have a B, that's a unique note. We have another E, so that's a duplicate, that's fine. We have a G sharp, cool, that's another unique note. So far we've had an E, a G sharp, and a B. They're unique notes. We have another B, which is duplicate. We have another E, which is duplicate. Okay, so really this chord only contains 3 individual notes, or 3 unique notes, which are E, G sharp, and B. Let's plot those on our major scale. So the first note is E, that makes sense. G sharp is here, which is the 3rd note of the scale, 1, 2, 3. So we could describe G sharp as being the 3rd of E major. That's where that term comes from. It comes from third. And every time we use the term third, we're referring to a major scale unless there is some alteration to it. So our B is not here, but here, which in this instance gives us the fifth note of the scale. 1, 3, 5. And for this, we can say that a major chord is constructed of 1, 3, and 5 from a major scale, starting from the first note. Now, we can actually build one of these 3-note chords from every step on this major scale, but we'll get to that later. That's something that's coming. So we can consider our major triad, or our major chord, to be root, third, and fifth. Root being synonymous with 1. So it's 1, 3, 5, or root 3, 5, depending upon how you want to phrase it. The same thing, it means the same stuff. Now, what's interesting about this is there are many, many places that we can play this chord and still have it be the case. Now, anywhere we play an E, a G sharp, and a B, the root, the third, and the 5 from E major, anywhere we play those, it will produce some kind of E major triad. Let's go through a few of them. Here is the most obvious one that we all know, but there are others. We can play one here. If you're familiar with the cage system, this would be a C shape. We could play one here, which would be a D shape. We could play one here, which we might call an A shape, and we could even play one here, which we might call a G shape. We're not super worried about that. The point with this is the recipe of the chord remains the same. If it contains an E, it contains a G sharp, and it contains a B, it is an E major triad. So some outlandish ways we could play that. We could play as follows. We could play open E, 24th fret harmonic on B, at a G sharp down here. Perhaps not the most useful way of playing it, but we could. Let me see if I can get these all at once. I don't think I can. That is an E major chord. Doesn't look like it, but it is one. Some slightly more useful ways we could play it. We could play this, which is E, B, and G sharp. We could play E, G sharp, and B here. We could play E here, B here, G sharp here, etc. We could play E, G sharp, and B here. All of these are, in essence, different ways of playing the same chord. Now, the way that we spell this chord out across the guitar's fretboard is what we would call voicing. Now, voicing is simply how we decide to spread the chord out. And there are some simple rules for this, or guidelines rather, because rules maybe isn't the word. Guidelines is maybe the word. As a rule of thumb, we tend to like, in lower registers, voicings that are spread further apart. And in higher registers, we tend to like voicings that are a little closer together, for reasons of physics that I may get into in the end if you guys are interested. But that is our major chord. Now, any major chord follows the same formula. So if we took a C major chord, for example, this is our C. We would expect this C chord to map to the notes 1, 3, and 5 of its parent major scale, which in this case is a C major scale. And that would give us C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. There's a C major shape, which is 3, 5, 7, 3, 5, 7, 4, 5. And wouldn't you know it, the notes in our chord are C's, E's, and G's, then duplicates of the same. Well, it's C is 1, E is 3, G is 5. Root, third, fifth. It gives us our major chord all the time, every time. This is something that is as close to a rule as you get in music. It is basically irrefutable. If you play the root, third, and fifth from a major scale together, you will get a major chord. That is just how it works. That is how it works. And any deviation from that is either a deviation from the major scale, so it ceases to be a major scale, or it's a deviation from a major chord and ceases to be a major chord. Hopefully you guys get the gist with this, right? Hopefully you follow along. Let me know in the comments if this is making sense, because we're going to start to make some alterations now, which will involve changing some of the notes in our chord. And for this, we're going to begin with the fundamental triads that we have access to. Now, triads being chords that contain, for the most part, a root, a third, sometimes not, but the third is normally, if it's not, it's normally something that's been done to the third, and a fifth of some description. Let's plot all the possible choices we could have, or all the useful possible choices. So if we take root, third, and fifth as they stand, we can start to move these notes around. We can take the fifth and we can flatten it. We can also take the fifth and we can sharpen it. So the 5 could be 5, it could be flat 5, or it could be sharp 5. Now the third is a bit simpler. The third can be the third as it appears in the major scale, or we can flatten it to call it the flat third or the minor third. And this is our first change in our triad, which is where we go from E major to E minor. It's the space chords. Don't believe me? Play the low E string. And say in a big voice, space. It's really big and there are planets. It's such a common musical device, right? It's just one of those things. But this major to minor shift is characterized by a single note changing. And in this case, it's the note of our first finger. We take the first finger note, which is currently on G sharp, and we remove it to reveal G. So we have G sharp, our G sharp has become G. Now, because this is the only instance of G sharp in this chord, it is the only one we have to change. But if we have multiple instances of G sharp, like we've said, we can have duplicate notes, we would have to change those too. So all of the G sharps in this case have become Gs, but let's take this away from its actual letters and we'll turn it into its numbers, because they're much more useful for other chords. If you have, say for example, a C chord, and you change from G to G sharp, it does not give you a C major or C minor. It gives you something completely different. It gives you this, which is something else. That's another story. So in this case, the note that's actually changing, while it's G sharp to G, is we are changing the third to a flat third. And that is what turns a major chord into a minor chord. We flatten the thirds. So if you take 3 in any chord and you move it to a flat 3 with no other alterations, we could consider it to be minor. Now this would give us the change from here to here, but it's also true wherever we play it on the fretboard. So we could play something like this, for example, where we play E, G, and maybe this B here for the sake of a stretch. And then we take this G sharp on the 11th fret on the A string, and we move it down here. This is an E minor. That is an E major. It doesn't look like E major or E minor, but because it contains all of the appropriate constituent notes, it is an E minor. It's just voiced differently. Other examples might be if we take some piano style voicings or some Eric Johnson style voicings like this. Major, minor, major, minor, major, minor, major, minor, etc. Little minor relay, little major relay. So on and so forth. Because each of those contains either root third fifth or root flat third fifth, it gives us our minor or major chord. And this is true anywhere you play it. So we could take this chord, for example, which is an A major. 1, 2, 3 from the major scale. We can take the 3, which is here, and move it down to here. That's taking our 3 and moving it to a flat 3, which gives us an A minor, regardless of how we play it. So this, A minor. There's our A, there's our C, there's our E, or root flat third fifth. To turn it into root third fifth would give us major. Now here's an interesting thing. With this, depending upon the context, this might be enough information for us to discern a chord. That is root, the A string, and third, versus root, minor third. So this is where the 2 is enough thing sometimes comes in. If the 2 is root and third, that's probably enough to call it a chord, I think. If it's root and third, you could call it a chord. If it's just root and fifth, however, we don't have enough information to infer whether that chord is major or minor, which is where power chords come in. So let's go into why. If we play root and fifth with our E, I'll show you this right now. I'm going to play the root, the fifth, and then the root again on the low 3 strings. And I'm going to fret this G sharp, which is my third, but I won't play it. So this is E major. Hello, camera, behave yourself. E major, E minor. It sounds identical. Why? Because I'm not playing the third. What this tells us is that if we don't have a third in a chord, like with a power chord, we have no way of telling if that chord is major or minor unless we have some context, i.e. it's bedded into a progression. So you could consider power chords, which are made up of just root and fifth, to be ambiguous, so to speak. And that's one of the reasons why they work so well with distortion, because there isn't a whole load of intervals crowding for each other. In that, very quickly, with playing chords with distortion, the reason I'm demoing this with a cleanish tone is the more distorted your chords are, or the more distorted your tone is rather, the bigger the individual notes are. And there is so much sonic space that we can occupy. If we have little small notes with this clean sound, where each note sounds petite and like a little, like this, each note is wee and tiny, and we can play lots of them and have them make sense. That would sound, especially if we put this on top, like an absolute clattering mess with distortion. Beautiful chord as it is. Bonus points if anybody knows what this chord is, by the way. A very pretty chord nonetheless, I'm sure, but bonus points if anybody know what it is. If we throw some big distortion on, for example, we go to the lead tone from the intro, and we play that same chord, it's going to be a tip. It's like Hard Day's Night through a broken phone, is what it sounds like. It's nobody's idea of fun. Now that is because, again, the bigger our notes are with distortion, the more space they occupy, the more they start to kind of bump into each other. Think about this as like trying to get, if you guys know what a Mini is, it's a little car. It's very popular in the UK. Think about getting like 4 or 5 dash Huns, little sausage dogs, into a Mini, and then think about getting 4 or 5 Bernese mountain dogs, these huge, big, fluffy guys. Think about getting those into a Mini. It's a bit more of a challenge. And then think about getting 4 or 5 horses into a Mini. Challenge. E minor something flat 9, says Nick Harrison. No, not quite. What it is, it's close. Good guess though. What we have is we have an E. I don't even know what it is myself. It's an E. I want to say it's an E minor 13 with the 11 included. Yeah, it's an E minor 13 with the 11 in. But because it's spread out so much, it makes sense. There's no fifth though, because we don't have to play the fifth really. But it's an E minor 13, just a very big and pretty sounding voicing of E minor 13. We'll get into what all that means in a second as well, by the way. But we have more triads to explore. So, major and minor triads, very common. But the next triads we've got are the ones that feature some movement on the fifth. And typically, the way these go is that if we have a flat third, we can also potentially include a flat fifth. And if we have a raised third or a major third, we can also potentially include a raised or sharp fifth. This gives us the following. If we play root, flat third, flat fifth, we get what's called a diminished chord or a diminished triad, which is a very sinister sounding beast. Sounds like so. Quite a fun chord depending upon where you play it. So if we play, for example, F diminished as a little transition between these two pretty chords, and then here again, it can be quite good fun. But we rarely sit and vamp on this. I don't think people sit and go, what are we going to jam on today, lads? Well, let's jam on E diminished. Yep, that's going to shift some records. Maybe not, but even still. Another example of this triad, and I'm glossing over these because they are less common. Bertrand Dugas says, sounds expensive. Probably not the diminished chord. Maybe it does. Maybe playing them together sounds expensive. The diminished chord sounds expensive in the same way that, like, you might be in a china shop, a shop selling fine china, and you knock something over. That's expensive. But it's an expensive disaster, which the diminished chord kind of sounds like. It's nice. It's tense, and tense is fun, because if everything is stable in music, then we don't feel anything. We need tension and push and pull in order to experience motion and movement in music. It's why tension exists. Tension's not nice on its own, but it makes the resolution that much sweeter. Anyway, I digress. So the other one we could potentially have is with root raised fourth, raised third rather, and then this guy. This is our sharp 5, and this produces a chord that we could call augmented. The way you can think about this is augmented is to add to something, and you can think about this as a triad with everything as high as you can get them. So as big as you can make it, as added as we can get things. Diminished refers to making something smaller, make it smaller, reduce it. And this we might think of as a triad with the spaces reduced to being as small as they can. So augmented triads sound a bit like this. It's an interesting beast and it sounds pretty cool. How often do we use it? Your guess is as good as mine. It's fun on a 5 chord. So if we're playing something in A, for example, and we want this lovely, tense sounding guy, we can have that. Yes, you can play them and they sound interesting. Chris Brown has rightly observed that they repeat every 4 frets. That's an interesting beast, for sure, because they're in 4 fret intervals. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. By the time we go to the next 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, we're back where we started. So any augmented shape that you could play, for example, if you took, I don't know, maybe you take like this one, where we play, and then you move that in these 4 fret jumps. Little slide there. You can move those around. It's the same notes every time. Now we're going to get to that when we get to some diminished stuff, but this is where we can get a little interesting because we now have the addition of 2 other triads that we can play with. We can play some triads. Now these other 2 triads are going to be involving some change to the third and changing the third into something that it is not. Specifically, we're going to refer to these as sus4 or sus2. Now sus2 is where we take the third, again from the major scale of a chord, and we move the third to be not the third, but the second. So we have root, second, fifth. These chords, if we have a major chord like this, root, third, root, fifth, root, third, fifth. If we take this third and move it down to a 2, we get this, which is a really pretty Purple Rain sounding chord. And if we throw some delay on it, sus2s can sound really, really pretty. Oftentimes when I'm doing that stuff, I'm playing between major triads and sus2s. Now the sus refers to suspended. Now what this means is the third has been essentially taken and moved to somewhere where you wouldn't expect it to be. Now this was thought to create a great deal of suspense. Our harmonic tastes have moved since the time that name came around. This was a time when people would clutch at their pearls for a dominant 7 chord. We'll get to that too. Now the sus4 is the same thing. Sus4 is where we take the 3, but instead of playing it as a 3, we play it as a 4. Root, 4, 5. Now interestingly, these chords are inversions of each other, because if we take a look at this shape, it's 2 frets, 5 frets, Well, if we play our sus4 and we go up here, it's 2 frets, 5 frets. Bizarrely, E sus4 and A sus2 are the same chord. They have the same notes. This is why things get a bit twisty when you start playing with sus chords. Is this an A sus2 or is it an E sus4? Who knows? Depends what else is going on harmonically. That's the only way we can tell. I digress. But sus4s also sound very cool. The fun thing about both of these chords is that these chords do not have a third in them, but they're colourful enough. They're colourful enough that they kind of count as a full chord. There's a sus4, there's a sus2. Nick Harrison's kind of right with this one. This is one of these kind of it's one of these semantic debates where he says a sus chord is technically not a sus chord until it's resolved. The debate goes on. Now, we could make the same argument about the melodic minor. So we could argue that the melodic minor is not the melodic minor if you play it using the ascending form in descent. So I think this is a semantics issue. I think you're absolutely right. But it's one of these. You would never play this in certain musical traditions because the melodic minor has 2 forms in certain traditions. So it really kind of depends. That's the jazz melodic minor. There we go, right? So we're getting into the semantics here. It really is a question of definitions. Now, for me, I'm coming from a tradition of contemporary music, of pop, rock, that side of things. Country, blues, etc. And I derive the majority of my my naming from the Nashville conventions because it's what I was taught and I find them quite useful. That's basically the gist of it. I wasn't taught in Nashville, by the way, in case somebody's wondering. Never been to Nashville. Would like to go. Maybe one day. Anyway, the point with these is much like our power chords. These chords are also tonally ambiguous. Is this major? Is it minor? No, it's neither, but also both. Is this major? Is it minor? No, it's neither, but also both. I love this. I'm coming from a peer pressure from dead men school of cobwebs. Fantastic. You know, aren't we all in some degree, but I can definitely relate to that, man. It's just different academic schools of thought, isn't it? Or schools of naming things. Now, as PJ's rightly pointed out, these are lovely and open, and they are in fact lovely and open. And the best thing about them is they also serve as perfectly fine substitutes for any major or minor triad. sus4 is difficult. Sometimes we have to be careful with that. sus2, occasionally we have to be careful, but normally that works a little better. To demonstrate this, I can quite happily play the progression from Don't Stop Believin', which is E major, B major, C sharp minor, A major, and play it with all sus2s. And the brain fills in the appropriate information. It just kind of makes sense. We're used to hearing them, and they also have this very pretty sound that works fantastically well with all of this lovely reverb and delay. But it also works well with distortion, like so. If we have distortion, reverb, and delay, we have a squealing amp, we can play these chords. And they actually sound quite cool. I'll tell you why in a second. Whereas these major chords sound a bit messy. It can work. These guitars are quite articulate, so it does kind of work, but even still. The reason these sus2s work is, in essence, sus2s and sus4s are actually just a stack of fifths. So what we get is it's a bunch of fifths standing together, standing up in a trench coat pretending to be a chord. But I'll show you what I mean. So if we take this E note and we find the fifth is here on B, it's 7 frets up. And then we go up another 7 frets, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Would you look where we've ended up? We've ended up on the 2, only up an octave. Sometimes referred to as the 9, which we're going to get to in a second. This gives us this chord, which some would call the Andy Summers chord, some would call the John Petrucci chord, depending upon where you come from. It is that, although he plays it a different way, but that's the same deal. But it's also this big Dream Theater-y sounding. It's that noise. It works really well. It works really well for all that sort of stuff, which is a very John Petrucci sound, I'm sure you'll agree. Now, you may, hopefully you'll agree. Now, that is sus in a nutshell, but this leads me to the next part of a next topic of conversation, which is what happens when we start adding more notes to our chord. Well, this is where we start to include some other stuff. So we start to include some of the stuff, specifically notes that aren't roots, thirds, and fifths. And this gives us a whole new school of chords that we can call seventh chords, that some folks from a jazz tradition would just call chords. Remember, we talked about this a while ago, where we mentioned that, you know, is a triad a chord? Well, it depends who you ask. Is a dyad a chord? 2 notes. Depends who you ask. For some people, 4 notes are the bare minimum for a chord. For other people, 3 notes is the bare minimum. For some folks, 2 notes is the bare minimum. It really depends. There are so many schools of thought on this, and it's where the language becomes, let's just say it becomes, there are opinions on this stuff. I like to think about this more as like American versus UK English, in that we both kind of know what each other means. If you had sufficient cultural exposure to folks from the UK and folks from the US, you should know what a sidewalk is or a pavement is, and you should know that one culture spells colour with a U and the other one doesn't. And aluminum versus aluminium, aluminium, there is actually a spelling difference. We spell it with aluminium, and the US spells it with aluminum without the extra letter. We can be like as tribal about this as we like, but it's like, come on, man, we know what we mean. We know what we mean. Nobody's going to say, excuse me, can you show me where the pavement is? And somebody will show you like a horse or something. It's the same thing. If somebody says, play me a chord, and you play a triad, they won't go, that's not a chord. You're wrong, unless that person is a horrible person, in which case you can just ignore them, you laugh at them and move away. Move on with your life. Anyway, on to seventh chords and extensions. Now, seventh chords contain, as you might imagine, a seventh, which is where they get the name from. And the seventh in this instance is, to begin with, the seventh note of the major scale. Or is it? Now let's talk about the difference between E7, E major 7, and E minor 7. We're going to begin with E7. Now you might think that it would contain notes 1, 3, 5, and 7 from a major scale, but it does not. It contains 1, 3, 5, and the note flat 7, which is 1 note lower than the 7th in a major scale. 1, 3, 5, 7. It's the sound from the little breakdown in that Feel Good, James Brown. Well, there's a 9 in there too. But it's that same kind of chord. We'll get to the 9 bit in a second. We're coming with that. In case you're going, hang on, there's only 7 notes. How can there be 9? Well, jazz. But we'll get into why. We'll get into that in a second. Now, here we go with the 7th thing. So, if we include root, 3rd, 5th, and a flat 7, we just call this chord 7. It is an E7 chord. Now this is sometimes referred to as E dominant 7. Again, this is an apocryphal thing from when we used to refer to notes as mediant, submediant, dominant, leading tone, etc. The dominant chord would be the 5th chord in a particular scale, and this naturally produces a 7th chord that has the properties that we ascribe to a dominant chord now, i.e. root, 3rd, 5th, flat 7. It was naturally found from the dominant note, the 5th note of the major scale, which is why it's called dominant 7. But we are not strictly bound to playing this on chord 5. But you will find one on chord 5, should you want to play one in its natural habitat. But we can play them all over the place. If you're playing funk, you play dominant chords on the root note, usually. It's a bit lame sounding, so we play the 9. Famously, James Brown would audition guitar players by, they'd walk in the room and he'd say, "Hey man, are you the guitar?" I won't do the voice. "Hey man, are you the guitar player?" Then you'd go, "Yes, Mr. Brown, I'm the guitar player." And he'd go, "Right on. Can you play D9?" Then you'd go, "Yes, Mr. Brown, I can play D9." And he'd go, "All right. Hey man, can you play D9 all night?" And that was the audition. And so on and so forth. Good fun. But we're going to get to those. Now, that is a 7th chord. Root, 3rd, 5th, 7. If we include a raised 7, root, 3rd, 5th, raised 7, the actual 7 from our major scale, this gives us a chord that we might refer to as major 7, which is this pretty sounding beast. Mal Riley with a great observation, by the way, just throwing this out there. My Gemini AI said a chord is generally defined as a group of 2 or more, and more commonly 3 or more distinct musical notes sounded simultaneously. Well done, Gemini AI. I think that's a fine definition. We'll ignore the fact that an AI chatbot recently tried to kill a guy by getting him to eat bromide salt or something. But whatever. That is a very good definition. Your AI is on your side, Mal Riley. It's a great definition, and thank you for sharing that. I think that is a very good working definition. Anyway, I digress. The other 7 that we commonly hear is this, which is root, flat 3rd, 5th, flat 7. This would produce a minor 7 chord, which gives us this. We've heard that loads. It's not in the right key, but you get the drill. You get the drill. Is it in the right key? I don't know what key that's in. It's been a while. Anyway, that is our 7 chords, but we've missed one. We've missed the possible iteration where we have root, flat 3rd, 5th, and a raised 7. Because we've had this, we've had this, we've had this, but we haven't had this. That would produce a chord that we call minor major 7. It's less common, but we get this. It's minor with a major 7. It's like the James Bond chord. And it has a similar kind of tension to when we play something like this. But it also has a similar kind of tension to when we play the augmented chord that we discussed earlier on, which would be something akin to this. Recognize that same tension there, hopefully. Hopefully we recognize that. Now, let's get into some more 7ths. Now we have that. Another potential one that we could have is we could have this interesting sounding beast where we play the 6th note of our major scale, but we don't call it the 6th note. We call it a doubly flatted 7. Wow. So there's 7. There's flat 7. There's the doubly flatted 7, which is this. That is root, flat 3rd, flat 5, doubly flatted 7. That gives us a diminished 7 chord, which is this. And this is another symmetrical chord. This is a stack of 3 fret intervals. And then if I can tap with my pinky finger, oop, we get that. Which gives us this. Interesting sounding beast, which also becomes this delicious Malmsteen kind of trip, which is the diminished 7th arpeggio played all across the guitar's fretboard. It is a unique and interesting and fun sounding arpeggio or chord, but it also highlights an interesting thing about symmetry in music. And this is as follows. Symmetry is fascinating in music because music is, to my mind, the only art form where we don't find symmetry pleasing, where we find symmetry unsettling. In most aesthetic pursuits, certainly visual aesthetic pursuits, we find symmetry to be not the pinnacle of beauty, but certainly a counterpart of it. People with symmetrical faces we tend to find more attractive, or in general. Structures with symmetry, photographs with symmetry, or videos with symmetry, for example. This studio has been laid out such, not by accident, but we have symmetry. Symmetry. In music, symmetry, no likey. We're not into the symmetry because it unsettles us. It's augmented chords. It's whole tone scales, as Nick Harrison pointed out. Tend to find them quite unsettling. Why? Don't know. Who can say? But it's an interesting observation nonetheless. Now this leads me into one final example of a seventh chord, which is useful to know, which is what happens if we take root, flat third, flat fifth, and just a regular flat seven, as opposed to a doubly flatted seven. This gives us the half diminished, aka a minor seven, flat five. Useful in a great number of jazz situations. Which leads me to this, the sixth chord. Now this is a minor six, but we can also have major sixes. A major six or a minor six is what happens when we take a major seven or a minor seven, and instead of playing the seven, we play the six from a major scale. And similarly minor, we play the six from the major scale. We don't play the flat six, that's something else. It's actually from the Dorian scale, but you get the gist. It's this lovely sounding chord. We take the major seven or the minor seven and replace it with a six. That's where six chords come from. This leads me to the final point, which is chord extensions. Now, chord extensions are a bit of a wild west because as with a family tree, as we start to add more possible notes to a chord, the more possibilities for what that chord could be there are. But let's talk about the most common ones. The most common ones are 9s, 11s, and 13s. And 9s, 11s, 13s are as follows. So if we take our major scale, once again, and we play up to note 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's the same as 2. Now, technically it's up an octave, but that is a definition that's gone the way of the dodo, much like the jazz minor scale. We don't need to play it up the octave. You can bury it any way you like in a chord, and it's fine. It's the same note as 2. Similarly, if we count 9, 10, 11, it is the same note as 4. 11, 12, 13, it is the same note as 6. We can use these as ways of ornamenting chords. We can add them to seventh chords. We can either include a 9, an 11, or a 13 to create the following. Here is an example of E major 7. Let's do minor. Here's E minor 7. Here is E minor 9. Here is E minor 11. And here is E minor 13. Oh, that's not it. Here's E minor 13. Once again, minor 7, plugging in the 9, plugging in the 11, plugging in the 13. They all have unique sounds that are all quite interesting to each other. That's how we refer to a 9, a 13, or an 11. 9, 11, 13. It's, did you include the 2? Did you include the 4? Did you include the 6? An interesting point with this is with the 11 or with the 13, you can also include a 9. So if you include an 11, you can also include a 9. But it's very uncommon to include an 11 and a 13. It's very uncommon to include both. It's either 11 or 13, otherwise you're just playing a whole major scale. And when you get to these sorts of chords, where there's so much information here, one little rule that you can use is that you don't have to play all of the notes, and you can start to pull some of them out. The most common one to take out straight away is the 5, because we kind of assume there's going to be a 5 there, and we sort of hear the 5 without necessarily needing to hear it. For example, this did not have the 5 included. If I included the 5 on top, does it add much to the chord in terms of its value? Not so much. If I add it somewhere in the middle, for example, if I take, let's find an interesting way to play this. Let's play here. There's an E minor 11. Let me show you that shape. If I mute the A string, nothing really happens. The A string is carrying the 5th. We'll lose a bit of density, but we don't really lose any flavour. If I mute the high string, which is carrying the 11, the chord takes on a very different character. And so on and so forth. Now those are 9s, 11s, and 13s, and we name them with the same naming convention as 7 chords. So if we have E9, E11, or E13, we assume it's dominant, which has major 3rd, flat 7. If we hear major 9, major 11, or major 13, we assume it's coming from major 7, which is root, major 3rd, major 7th. If we hear minor, same deal, flat 3rd, flat 7. So minor 11, minor 13. Crucially, however, the extensions don't change. So we don't play a flat 13 when we play minor 13. We still play the major 13, if that makes sense. The last note on this that we'll do today, of course, there are other chords. We haven't done them all, but we're doing quite a lot of them. The last note we'll talk about today is what happens when you do this and don't include a 7. So if you play a triad and include these chord extensions, we use the word add to describe it. This is the difference between something like C add 9 and C major 9. C add 9 is what happens when we take a C chord and include the 9, which is the same as 2. C major 9 is what happens when we take a C major 7 chord and include the 9. There's a distinct difference in the tonality. One is breezy and open. The other one is soft and romantic, or however you want to describe it. Silky or expensive. That's add chords. So if there's a 7, it's not an add. If you have no 7, it is add. Add 9 versus major 9. We don't need to make a distinction between major and dominant with add chords because there is no 7 to distinguish between them. Similarly, we can have minor 9, minor 11, minor 13. We can also have minor add 9, minor add 11, and minor 13. Ultimately, these are just ways of categorizing and remembering these chords and where they go together. That's been a whole hour on chord construction, and we haven't even finished it yet, but that's okay, because we've got 2 other sessions on chords, which are going to show you what to do with this information. So I'm going to take a quick look at some comments and questions. We have run out of time, but I'll go just a little bit further on this. It's an interesting thing because we've had some really good ones. We've had some conversations here about, where's Chris Brown mentioned this? I should have started up earlier, but I was kind of trying to rattle through this. He was asking about the flat 3rd being banned. We didn't talk about altered extensions. We'll get to those. They're coming. I'm sure you can use your brain and figure out what a flat 9 is. It's a 9 that's down a 2. It's down a tone, a semitone rather. Sorry, you can tell I'm scrolling and failing to find this question because it was a cool question. It was a cool comment, but it was with regards the banning of the flat 5 interval we're talking about the old times, the ye olde medieval period. I'm going to find it and then we'll talk about it real quick because there's something I want to highlight on that. Augmented. Okay, here we go. Yeah, if the flat 5 was banned in the early church, was the sharp 4 allowed? Well, ye olde, just, I hate to say it, but much like nobody pronounced ye as ye, it was pronounced as thee. And the Y letter was actually thorn, which was th. So it was a TH sound and then E, so it was actually the. The story about the flat 5 being banned by the church is unfortunately apocryphal. It's not true, but it's a fun story. All the same, it's a fun story. One that was actually apparently banned, don't know the truth on this, was the major scale. The major scale was apparently frowned upon as modus lascivius, which is the wanton mode, and it was the sound of pirates and carousing and people generally having a good time, and it was considered to be too unserious for worship music, apparently. But yeah, apparently it's not true. Apparently it's untrue, which is a shame. It is quite difficult to sing, though, so you didn't find a lot of it in choral music, because it's quite a difficult interval to get folks to sing, so that could be why. That could be something to do with it. But it's a really interesting point. It's a really interesting point. Justin Ray says Add9 versus sus2 is when the third remains and the sus chord omits the third. You are 100% correct. 100% correct. Folks, we have run out of time, but here is a great resource for you guys. It was a joke, says Chris Brown. I know it was. But it was. I can't resist, man. I'm a nerd. I can't resist. If somebody feeds me something like that, I'm like, yep. We got a lot of love for this book. This is Ted Green's Chord Chemistry, right? Now, this is the text on chord construction for all this sort of stuff. I think this is worth anybody's time, I would suggest. But also, it is worth your time, 1,000 times over worth your time, to go and watch, because Ted Green passed away quite recently. It's worth your time to go and watch Ted Green playing the guitar. There are videos that have emerged, and it is the most remarkable guitar playing you'll ever see in your entire life. There's this fantastic example where he's just talking about playing something in the style of Bach, for example. I think it was Bach. I want to say it was Bach. And he starts improvising what sounds like a hidden Bach chorale, like a lost one. And he's playing away, and then he improvises counterpoint around this while moving through changes. And all the time that he's doing this, he's explaining what he's doing, because this is not a performance, it's a lesson. And the level of understanding and virtuosity on display is staggering, right? If you ever want to be humbled by a guitar player, a real proper guitar player, someone like that. A couple of places you can go. Danny Gatton is one of them. Joe Pass is one of them. But yeah, Ted Green, my giddy aunt, what a guitar player and what a resource, right? I would encourage you to go check out the book. Folks, we've run out of time. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a lot of fun. Let's not forget that these streams are every Monday. Hit the appropriate YouTube buttons on the way out. It is brought to you, of course, by licklibrary.com and guitarinteractive.com. Guitar Interactive Magazine, I digress.com. We'll see you guys next week for more chord stuff. I am going to play out on the same track. We're going to get to some of the stuff that I'm doing here with the chord tones maybe next time. But for the time being, I'll see you next time.